He shared his meal with a bear cub. The bear's reaction left everyone stunned. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the forest, painting the horizon in golden streaks. Daniel, a quiet man who had spent much of his life working on his small farm at the edge of the woods, sat on a weathered log beside the clearing. He unwrapped his simple meal, just a loaf of bread, some smoked meat, and a flask of water. After a long day of mending fences and hauling hay, this was his moment of peace, with only the whisper of pine trees and the distant call of crows for company. But that peace didn't last. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made Daniel pause mid-bite. His hand froze, gripping the bread tightly, while his eyes scanned the thick shadows of the trees. At first, he thought it might be a deer, or maybe a fox searching for scraps. But then, through the tangled ferns, a small figure emerged, clumsy, trembling, and heartbreakingly thin. It was a bear cub. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The animal's dark eyes locked onto him, wide with a mix of hunger and fear. Its tiny frame wobbled as it stepped forward, sniffing the air, clearly drawn by the smell of his food. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew the risks. Where there was a cub, a mother bear was usually close by, and that could mean danger. Yet something felt different. The cub was alone. Its fur was patchy, its ribs visible beneath the matted coat. More than wildness, Daniel saw desperation in its gaze. The man shifted slightly, his instincts torn between fear and compassion. The forest grew strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. Slowly, the cub edged closer, its nose twitching, its paws hesitant but determined. Daniel realized he had a choice: drive it away to protect himself, or take the risk of sharing his meal with a creature that clearly hadn't eaten in days. And with that, the extraordinary story began. Daniel's grip tightened on the loaf of bread in his hand. His mind raced with warnings he had heard countless times: never feed wild animals. Never make them trust humans. It could end badly for both. And yet, staring at the trembling little bear cub in front of him, those words felt distant, powerless against the reality of what stood before him. The cub let out a faint, pitiful cry, a sound so fragile it pierced the stillness of the forest and lodged itself deep in Daniel's chest. It sniffed the ground, edging closer, but stopped just a few feet away, as if an invisible line of fear held it back. Daniel tore off a small piece of bread and held it out. His hand shook slightly, not from fear of the cub itself, but from the weight of the decision. One wrong move and he could endanger himself, or worse, condition the cub to seek out humans who might not be as kind. The cub's ears twitched. Its nose quivered as it caught the scent. For a moment, it stayed frozen, its dark eyes darting between Daniel and the food. Then, with hesitant steps, it closed the gap. Daniel's breath hitched as the cub sniffed his hand, the warm puff of its breath brushing against his skin. Slowly, carefully, the cub took the piece of bread between its teeth. It didn't snatch it. It didn't growl. It simply chewed, its small jaws working eagerly, as if savoring the first real bite it had tasted in days. Something inside Daniel shifted. The fear ebbed, replaced by a quiet awe. The cub looked up at him with those wide, glistening eyes, and for a fleeting moment man and animal were no longer strangers. They were simply two hungry souls sharing a meal beneath the fading sun. Daniel reached for another piece of bread. This time, the cub didn't hesitate. As the cub finished the last crumb of bread, it gave a soft snuffle and sat down just a few feet from Daniel, its tiny body sinking into the grass as though it finally felt safe enough to rest. Daniel watched in silence, unsure what to do next. His meal was almost gone, but something told him this little creature needed it more than he did. He broke off another strip of smoked meat and laid it carefully on the ground between them. The cub sniffed at it, tilted its head, and then inched closer. This time, when it ate, it didn't retreat. Instead, it remained nearby, chewing noisily, occasionally glancing up at Daniel as if checking whether the strange human truly meant no harm. The forest around them was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of an owl, but for Daniel, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. He could see now how young the cub was. Its paws were clumsy, too big for its body, and its eyes still carried that wide-eyed innocence of early life. It hit him then: this cub was alone. No mother bear was watching from the shadows. No sibling stumbled behind. The loneliness in the animal's posture mirrored something Daniel himself knew all too well. Ever since his wife passed away, the farm had been quieter than he could bear. Meals like this one had been moments of solitude, reminders of a life once filled with laughter. And now, Here sat this orphaned cub, filling a silence that had stretched on for far too long. Tentatively, Daniel reached out a hand, palm open, giving the cub the choice to come closer or stay away. The little creature sniffed his fingers, then nudged them lightly with its nose. The gesture was small, fleeting. But to Daniel, it was everything. For the first time in months, he smiled. The next few days turned into a quiet rhythm. Each evening when Daniel carried his supper outside, the cub would appear from the trees, hesitant at first, but always drawn back by hunger and perhaps something more. What had begun as a chance encounter was slowly becoming a ritual, a fragile bond deepening under the watchful eyes of the forest. But soon, Daniel wasn't the only one to notice. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, a pair of hikers passed near the clearing. They stopped dead in their tracks at the sight, a rugged farmer, seated calmly on a log, with a bear cub munching on scraps of bread at his feet. "Are you insane?" one of them whispered sharply. "That's a wild animal. Its mother could be nearby." Daniel simply kept still, letting the cub nibble at the food without fear. He had learned that sudden movements unsettled it, and patience was the only way to earn its trust. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances. Word spread quickly in the small village nearby. By the end of the week, Daniel's unusual friendship had become a subject of hushed conversations and raised eyebrows. Some called him reckless. Others called him foolish. But a few, those who had seen the cub's frail body, its lonely eyes, felt something different, a quiet admiration. Still, Daniel knew the risks. Feeding a wild animal could change its behavior forever, teaching it to depend on humans. And yet, every time he looked at the cub's fragile frame, he felt that same tug of compassion. He couldn't turn away. One evening, as the cub pressed closer than ever before, curling its body at his feet like a trusting pup, Daniel noticed something else. The cub wasn't just surviving anymore, it was beginning to thrive. Its fur looked fuller. Its steps steadier. The whispers of doubt from the outside world no longer mattered. What mattered was here, in the clearing, where kindness was rewriting the rules of the wild. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the forest seemed to hold its breath. Daniel sat with his supper as usual, the cub padding toward him with more confidence than ever before. Its awkward steps had become steadier, its eyes brighter, its body stronger with each passing day. Daniel felt a swell of pride every time he saw it, like watching a child grow under his care. That evening, however, something happened that neither Daniel nor anyone watching could have expected. As Daniel tore off a strip of meat and placed it on the ground, the cub hesitated. Instead of eating right away, it picked up the food gently in its mouth. Then, with deliberate steps, it padded toward Daniel and placed the piece directly into his lap. Daniel blinked, stunned. For a moment, he thought it was an accident. But the cub sat back on its haunches, watching him with eyes that seemed far older than its small body. It was as if the animal understood the gesture of giving back. A soft laugh escaped Daniel, but it was laced with emotion. "You're sharing with me," he whispered, his voice rough. At that very moment, two villagers who had followed him into the woods stood frozen a few yards away. They had expected to witness a reckless man courting danger, but what they saw instead left them speechless. A wild bear cub was offering food to a human. The villagers exchanged looks of disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," one murmured. The other simply shook his head, eyes wide. Daniel, meanwhile, reached out and accepted the gift. He didn't eat it, out of respect, but he held it gently, his throat tightening with emotion. This was no longer just survival. It was trust. Gratitude. A silent language between two lives that should have been divided by fear, yet somehow found each other in kindness. And for everyone who witnessed it, the cub's reaction was nothing short of miraculous. In the days that followed, the cub continued to grow stronger, its trust in Daniel unshakable. Each evening became a ritual of quiet companionship, man and bear, sitting side by side as the forest bathed in the glow of sunset. The story of Daniel and the cub spread beyond the village. Some dismissed it as foolishness, while others saw it as a rare glimpse into the extraordinary bond that can form when compassion outweighs fear. For Daniel, it was simpler than that. He hadn't set out to tame a wild animal or prove anything to anyone. He had only seen hunger in a helpless creature's eyes, and chosen to share what little he had. One evening, as the cub curled close to him, Daniel whispered, "You've given me more than I've given you." And he meant it. The little bear had filled the silence of his lonely days with a presence that reminded him of hope, connection, and the simple truth that kindness has a way of echoing back. In time, the cub would find its place again in the wild, stronger and wiser. Daniel knew that. But their bond, the memory of a shared meal under the whispering pines, would remain forever. And so the lesson lingered. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion can leave the deepest mark, not only on the one who receives it, but on the one who gives it.